I'm sure the coach cabin is perfectly lovely for people like you. That one sentence, dripping with the kind of venom that curdles the air, was the spark that ignited an inferno at 30,000 feet. What would you do if you heard those words, spat at your child, a 16-year-old girl sitting quietly in a first-class seat she rightfully owned? Most of us would argue, maybe demand an apology. But what you're about to hear is a story about a mother who did more. A mother who, with a few calm words, brought an entire international airline to its knees. This isn't just a story about racism. It's a masterclass in consequence, a chilling tale of what happens when you underestimate the wrong person. Stay tuned, because the fallout from this flight is a story you won't forget. The scent of warm towels and something vaguely floral hung in the air of the Aerovista Premier first-class cabin. For 16-year-old Zoe Washington, it was an alien atmosphere. She was more accustomed to the cramped quarters of coach, the polite but firm battle for armrest supremacy, and the scent of lukewarm coffee. But this trip was different. This was a celebration. Her acceptance into a prestigious summer program for young scientists at Oxford University was a monumental achievement, and her mother Isabel had insisted on marking the occasion. The long-haul flight from New York to London would be in style. Zoe sank deeper into the plush leather seat, to be a window seat with enough legroom to host a small picnic. She ran her hand over the polished wood-grain finish of the console beside her, feeling a thrill of imposter syndrome mixed with pure excitement. She pulled out her advanced physics textbook, its cover dog-eared and familiar, a small anchor to her real life in this surreal environment. She was so engrossed in a chapter on quantum mechanics that she barely noticed the woman settling into seat 2C across the aisle. The first thing Zoe did notice was the perfume. It was an overwhelming wave of expensive, heavy floral notes that seemed to suck the air from around her. The second was the sigh. It was a long, theatrical exhalation of pure annoyance. Zoe glanced up. The woman, who looked to be in her late 50s, with a helmet of perfectly coiffed blonde hair and a string of pearls tight against her wrinkled neck, was staring directly at her. Not just looking, but staring. It was a look of profound disbelief, as if she'd just discovered a raccoon nesting in her champagne bucket. The woman, Brenda Harrington, flagged down a flight attendant with a sharp, impatient snap of her fingers. A young man with a pinned-on smile and a name tag that read Gregory hurried over. "Yes, Mrs. Harrington. Can I get you a pre-departure beverage? Some champagne, perhaps?" Brenda didn't look at Gregory. Her eyes remained locked on Zoe. "There seems to be a mistake," she said, her voice carrying across the aisle with perfect cutting clarity. "I believe this young lady is in the wrong cabin." Zoe's cheeks flushed hot. She felt the eyes of the other first-class passengers. A man in a tailored suit, a couple whispering to each other, turned towards her. Gregory glanced from Brenda to Zoe, his smile faltering slightly. I can check her boarding pass, ma'am," he offered. "Please do," Brenda said. She took a sip of water from a glass, already on her tray, her pinky finger extended. "I'm sure the coach cabin is perfectly lovely for people like you." The last 4 words were quieter, but in the hushed cabin, they landed like a slap. "People like you." The phrase hung in the air, thick and ugly. It wasn't just about age. Zoe knew that with a sickening certainty. She was the only black person in the first-class cabin. Zoe's heart hammered against her ribs, but she remembered her mother's words. "Never let them see you crumble. Dignity is a shield they can't pierce." She took a slow breath and reached into her bag, pulling out her boarding pass. Her hand trembled slightly as she offered it to Gregory. "Seat 2B, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. Zoe Washington. Gregory took the pass, his eyes darting nervously between the unimpeachable evidence in his hand and the imperious glare of Brenda Harrington. It seems everything is in order, Mrs. Harrington. The passenger is in her assigned seat. Brenda let out a short, sharp laugh of disbelief. Assigned, don't be ridiculous. She probably snuck up here while the crew was busy. Or perhaps she lifted a boarding pass from someone's bag in the lounge. You should check her belongings. The accusation of theft was so outrageously false, it momentarily stunned Zoe into silence. She was a scholarship student, a straight-A champion of the debate team, a girl who once returned a lost wallet with $300 still inside. And here in this capsule of luxury, she was being painted as a common thief. "Ma'am, I can't just," Gregory began, clearly out of his depth. "Are you questioning my judgment?" Brenda's voice dropped, taking on a steely edge. "I am a platinum medallion member with this airline. I spend more on flights in a year than this girl's entire family probably earns. Now either you handle this situation and remove her, or I will have your name and badge number, and I will be speaking to your supervisor before this plane even leaves the ground." The threat worked like a charm. Gregory's professional veneer cracked, replaced by a panicked desire to placate the most aggressive person in the confrontation. He turned to Zoe, his expression now one of strained authority. "Miss," he said, avoiding her eyes, "there has been a complaint. To ensure the comfort and security of all our passengers, I'm going to have to ask you to come with me to the galley." A complaint about what Zoe challenged her voice, rising slightly. "I was sitting here reading. I haven't done anything. It's just procedure." Gregory insisted, his face slick with sweat. He was no longer a host. He was a bouncer, and he had chosen his side. "Please, don't make this more difficult." The man in the suit across the way cleared his throat and looked as if he might speak, but a sharp glare from Brenda silenced him. He retreated behind his newspaper. No one was coming to help. She was alone. Humiliation washed over Zoe in a cold wave. She felt like a specimen under a microscope. Slowly, deliberately, she marked her page in the physics book, closed it, and placed it in her bag. She stood up, her movements stiff with a mixture of anger and shame, as Gregory escorted her down the aisle past the pitying and curious stares. She heard Brenda Harrington say to the passenger next to her, loud enough for Zoe to hear, "Finally. Some standards are being upheld." Zoe didn't look back. She kept her chin high, focusing on the narrow corridor leading away from her celebratory seat, away from the window she had been so excited to look out of. The scent of warm towels now seemed to mock her, a symbol of a welcome that had been poisoned from the very first moment. In the galley under the harsh fluorescent lights, the world of first class felt 1,000,000 miles away, and all she could think to do was call her mum. The galley was a cramped, sterile space of stainless steel and tightly packed drawers. It felt like an interrogation room. Gregory stood with his arms crossed, trying to project an authority he clearly didn't possess. A more senior flight attendant, a woman named Sandra, with a weary expression, had joined them. "So what's the problem?" Sandra asked her, tone suggesting this was an unwelcome interruption to her pre-flight duties. "Mrs. Harrington in 2C filed a complaint," Gregory explained, gesturing vaguely back toward the cabin. "She alleges the passenger, this young lady, was being disruptive and may not have a valid ticket for the cabin." Zoe's jaw dropped. Disruptive. I was reading a book. I didn't say a single word to her until she accused me of being in the wrong seat. Sandra looked at Zoe, then at her manifest. "It says here Zoe Washington, seat 2B. The ticket is valid, paid in full. She accused me of stealing it." Zoe added, her voice shaking with indignation. "She told him to search my bags. Sandra shot Gregory a withering look. "Did you accuse this child of theft, Gregory?" "No." "Of course not," he said quickly, his face reddening. "Mrs. Harrington suggested it. I was just trying to de-escalate." By removing the person who was being silently victimized, Zoe shot back, her debate team instincts kicking in. "How is that de-escalation? That's rewarding the aggressor." Gregory flinched. He wasn't prepared for an articulate, logical defense. He had expected tears or shouting something that would validate his decision to remove her. Zoe's composure was an indictment of his cowardice. "Look, Miss Washington," Sandra said, her voice softening slightly but still firm. "Mrs. Harrington is a frequent and valuable customer. She is insisting she feels unsafe. Now, we know it's ridiculous, but airline policy gives us discretion to reseat passengers to resolve conflicts." "So I'm the one who has to move?" Zoe asked, incredulous. "Even though I did nothing wrong, she racially profiled me, insulted me, and accused me of being a criminal, and I'm the one who gets punished." The word racially profiled hung in the air. Gregory looked at the floor. Sandra's lips thinned. It was the truth they had both been trying to dance around. "Our hands are tied," Sandra said, though her voice lacked conviction. "We can offer you a premium economy seat. It's still very comfortable, and we can give you a voucher for the fare difference and for a future flight." A voucher. They were offering her a coupon as compensation for being publicly humiliated. The injustice of it all was a physical weight in her chest. "No," Zoe said, her voice small but resolute. "I'm not moving. That is my seat. My mother bought it for me. I'm not giving it up because that woman is a racist." The standoff lasted for another minute. Sandra and Gregory exchanged helpless looks. They had hoped to intimidate her into compliance, but Zoe wasn't budging. Finally, Gregory, seeing his career flashing before his eyes, if Brenda Harrington followed through on her threat, made the final, fateful decision. "I'm sorry, miss," he said, his voice now cold and official. "But you are creating a disturbance. The captain has been informed, and he has authorized us to deplane you if you refuse to cooperate. Deplane." The word hit her like a punch to the gut. They were going to kick her off the flight. "You're kicking me off the plane," she whispered, the fight draining out of her. "Unless you take the seat in premium economy," Gregory confirmed. "It's your choice." It wasn't a choice. It was an ultimatum. They were holding her entire trip hostage. Tears of pure frustration and anger pricked at her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She would not give them the satisfaction. "Fine," she said, her voice thick. Can I just make a phone call first?" Sandra nodded, looking vaguely ashamed of herself. "Of course. Take a minute." Zoe pulled out her phone, her hands trembling so badly she could barely type in the passcode. She found her mother's contact and pressed call. Her mother, Dr. Isabel Washington, was likely already on the plane, probably in seat 3B, right behind where Zoe was supposed to be. She always booked seats near each other. The phone connected on the second ring. "Zoe, honey, is everything okay? I was just about to put my phone on airplane mode." Zoe tried to speak, but a sob caught in her throat. She ducked her head, turning away from the flight attendants, so they couldn't see the tears that now flowed freely down her cheeks. "Zoe, talk to me." "What's wrong?" Isabel's voice sharpened with concern. "Mum," Zoe whispered, her voice cracking. They're kicking me off the plane." There was a beat of stunned silence on the other end of the line. "What did you say?" Isabel's voice was dangerously quiet. "A woman in my aisle. She said I didn't belong here. She told the flight attendant I stole my ticket. And they believed her. They want me to move to the back of the plane, and I said no, so now they're making me get off the flight." Another silence, but this one felt different. It felt like the calm before a storm. Zoe could practically hear the gears turning in her mother's brilliant mind. "Where are you right now, Zoe?" "In the galley. At the front of the plane. Who is with you?" "2 flight attendants, Gregory and Sandra." "Okay, baby," Isabel said, her voice now a strange mixture of glacial calm and white-hot fury. "Don't move. Don't say another word to them. Put your phone away. I'm on my way." The line went dead. Zoe wiped her eyes and slid her phone into her pocket. She straightened her shoulders and turned to face the flight attendants, her expression now unreadable. Gregory cleared his throat. "Have you made your decision, Miss Yes?" Zoe said, her voice clear and even. "My mother is coming." Gregory and Sandra exchanged a confused look. They likely assumed her mother was in the terminal, a frantic parent who would come aboard and plead her daughter's case. They had no idea that the woman they were about to face was not just any parent. They had no idea that in their attempt to solve a small problem created by one prejudiced passenger, they had just created a catastrophic one for the entire airline. They had no idea that Dr. Isabel Washington was already on board, and she was about to cancel their flight. Dr. Isabel Washington moved through the first-class cabin like a surgeon heading into an operating theater, with purpose, precision, and an aura of absolute authority. She was a striking woman, tall and poised, dressed in a sharply tailored pantsuit that spoke of understated power. Her face, usually warm and quick to smile, was now a mask of cold, controlled fury. The other passengers who had been trying to pretend they weren't watching the drama unfold now stared openly as she strode from her seat in row 3 to the front of the plane. She arrived at the galley entrance, her eyes immediately finding Zoe's. She gave her daughter a look that said, "I'm here. It's over." Then her gaze shifted to the 2 flight attendants, and the temperature in the small space seemed to drop by 20 degrees. "I am Dr. Isabel Washington," she said, her voice calm, but resonating with a power that made both Gregory and Sandra straighten up. "This is my daughter Zoe. Perhaps one of you can explain to me in detail why she is standing in this galley in tears, instead of in seat 2B, the seat I purchased for her." Gregory, flustered by this new formidable presence, began to stammer. "Dr. Washington, there was a complaint from another passenger, a matter of cabin harmony. We simply tried to—" Isabel held up a hand, silencing him instantly. "Let me stop you right there. Was the complaint that my daughter was being loud, rude, in any way disruptive?" "Well, no, not exactly," Sandra chimed in, trying to be diplomatic. "The other passenger felt uncomfortable." "Uncomfortable," Isabel repeated the word, tasting like poison. She looked past them, her eyes landing on Brenda Harrington, who was craning her neck to see what was happening. Their eyes met for a brief, charged moment. Brenda looked away quickly, a flicker of unease crossing her face. So to be clear, Isabel continued her focus, returning to the crew. A passenger, Mrs. Harrington, I presume, expressed her discomfort that a black teenager was seated in first class. She made a baseless and defamatory accusation of theft. And your professional response as representatives of Aero Vista Premier was not to address the passenger making the racist accusations, but to remove the 16-year-old victim from her seat. Is that an accurate summary of events? Put so boldly, the crew's actions sounded not just unprofessional, but monstrous. Gregory swallowed hard. We were offering her an alternative seat. An alternative seat is not a solution. Isabel cut him off, her voice like chipping ice. It is a punishment. It is a validation of the prejudice that started this entire incident. You have sent a clear message to my daughter, to everyone in this cabin, that if a white passenger is racist, the black passenger will be the one to pay the price. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle in the cramped space. The captain, a silver-haired man named Robert Peterson, had been alerted and was now emerging from the cockpit, his face a mixture of confusion and concern. "What seems to be the trouble here?" he asked, looking at Isabel. Captain Isabel said, her tone shifting from prosecutorial to declarative. "I am Dr. Isabel Washington. My daughter has just been ejected from her rightfully purchased seat at the behest of a bigoted passenger and with the full compliance of your crew. Therefore, I need to inform you of a change of plans." She took a small step back, commanding the attention of everyone within earshot, the crew, the captain, and the nosy passengers in the first few rows. "This aircraft flight, AV-1110, is a private charter. It was chartered by the Global Health Initiative to transport its lead pediatric cardiac surgical team to London. We are scheduled to perform a series of life-saving heart surgeries on 6 children at the Cromwell Hospital, the first of which is in less than 24 hours. A murmur went through the cabin. Brenda Harrington's face went pale. The stakes of this flight had just been raised exponentially. Isabel's eyes found Captain Peterson's. "I am the lead surgeon on that team. The other 12 members of my unit are seated throughout this plane. I personally authorized the invitation for my daughter Zoe to join us on this flight as a guest and a celebration of her own academic achievements." She let that sink in before delivering the final devastating blow. "Since Aerovista Premier and your crew have made it abundantly clear that my daughter is not welcome on this aircraft, then my team and I will not be flying on it either. We will not be patronizing an airline that sanctions this kind of discriminatory behavior. Please open the door. We are deplaning. You can consider this charter and its 7-figure contract cancelled, effective immediately." Dead silence. The captain's jaw literally dropped. The colour drained from Gregory's face, leaving him looking like a ghost. Sandra stared horrified, as the full magnitude of the situation crashed down upon them. They hadn't just angered a passenger. They had insulted the one person who held the fate of the entire flight in her hands. Now wait a minute. Dr. Captain Peterson stammered, his mind racing to avert the impending disaster. "I think there's been a terrible misunderstanding." "There has been no misunderstanding," Isabel replied, her voice devoid of any warmth. She turned to her daughter. "Zoe, go back to seat 3B and get my things. I'll meet you at the jet bridge." Then, turning back to the dumbfounded captain, she said, "We will find another way to get to London. But it will not be with Aerovista. You have a plane full of people, Captain. I suggest you figure out what you're going to do with them." With that, she turned her back on them, took Zoe's hand, and walked calmly toward the aircraft door, leaving a scene of utter unmitigated chaos in her wake. The flight had not just been delayed. For all intents and purposes, it had been erased. The moment Dr. Washington and Zoe stepped onto the jet bridge, the fragile order of the aircraft disintegrated. It began with a ripple and became a tidal wave. Dr. Alistair Finch, a renowned anesthesiologist seated in 4A, stood up. "Well, if Isabel's out, I'm out. I'm not operating without my lead surgeon." He gathered his briefcase and followed her. One by one, like dominoes falling, the other 12 members of the Global Health Initiative surgical team stood up. Nurses, perfusionists, surgical techs, men and women of different ages and backgrounds, all began collecting their belongings. There was no discussion, no debate. Their loyalty to their leader was absolute. They were a unit, and an insult to one was an insult to all. The remaining passengers, the non-medical personnel who had simply booked tickets on what they thought was a regular commercial flight, began to clamour. "What's going on? Why are they leaving? Did she say the flight was cancelled?" "It was her," a man shouted, pointing a furious finger directly at a now-frozen Brenda Harrington. That woman in 2C, she started all of this. Brenda shrank in her seat, the pearls on her neck suddenly feeling like a choke collar. The eyes of the entire cabin were on her. The whispers were no longer curious. They were accusatory. She had wanted to put a young girl in her place, to exert her petty dominance. Instead, she had single-handedly scuttled a multi-million-dollar medical mission and stranded an entire plane of people. The smug satisfaction she had felt minutes earlier had curdled into pure, sickening dread. On the jet bridge, Captain Peterson and a frantic-looking gate supervisor intercepted Isabel. Dr. Washington, please, the captain, begged his professional composure, gone replaced by sheer desperation. We can fix this. The flight attendant. Gregory, he's been suspended from duty effective immediately. The passenger, Mrs. Harrington. We will deplane her right now. Your daughter can have her seat. We will give her the entire first-class cabin to herself if she wants. We will issue a formal apology. Please just name your price. Isabel looked at him, her expression unmoved. Captain, this stopped being about a seat the moment your employee chose to validate bigotry instead of protecting a child. This is about the culture of your airline. What would have happened if I wasn't the person who chartered this plane? What if my daughter was just a regular passenger? She would be sitting in the terminal crying, having been branded a troublemaker and a thief. And that woman she gestured back toward the plane would be sipping champagne, feeling victorious. That is the injustice I will not abide. She continued, this isn't about money or apologies anymore. It's about accountability. My team and I have a mission to complete. 6 children are waiting for us. We cannot entrust their lives to an airline with such profoundly broken judgment. The trust is broken, Captain, and it is irreparable. News traveled fast. An Aerovista Vice President of North American Operations, a man named Michael Preston, was patched through to Captain Peterson's phone. Isabel agreed to speak with him. The conversation was brief and one-sided. Dr. Washington Preston's voice, tinny and strained over the speakerphone, I am personally on behalf of the entire Aerovista executive team offering you our deepest apologies. This is not who we are. We will cover the full cost of your team's alternative travel, a private jet. Anything you need. Just please reconsider cancelling the charter. The logistical and public relations fallout will be catastrophic, Isabel finished for him. Perhaps you should have considered that before your crew decided to enforce racial segregation on one of your aircraft. The Global Health Initiative will be accepting your offer to pay for new travel arrangements. Our administrator will be in touch with your office to coordinate the charter of a new aircraft from a more reputable carrier. As for our contract with Aerovista, consider it terminated. Our legal team will be in touch regarding the breach of contract and the damages incurred. She handed the phone back to the captain. I believe our conversation is concluded. Back in the terminal, the scene was one of controlled chaos. The deplaned surgical team had gathered around Isabel and Zoe, forming a protective circle. The other passengers were now being told the flight was officially cancelled due to unforeseen logistical issues. Brenda Harrington was one of the last to deplane. She had to walk the gauntlet of furious glares from the other passengers. As she stepped into the terminal, she saw the medical team huddled together, their expressions grim and united. She saw Zoe standing next to her mother, no longer looking like a victim, but like the daughter of a queen. For the first time, Brenda felt a true, chilling stab of fear. This was not going to just blow over. This was the beginning of an unraveling she had foolishly started herself. The aftermath of Flight AV-10's cancellation was a cascade of swift and brutal repercussions, a clinical study in cause and effect. The consequences were not left to the whims of fate. They were delivered with the precision of a scalpel, surgically excising the offenders from the worlds they had so proudly inhabited. For Brenda Harrington, the reckoning began in the sterile silence of her chauffeured car home. Her phone, which she usually wielded like a scepter, had become a vibrating vessel of poison. Notifications flooded her screen from news alerts, social media tags, and frantic messages from colleagues. A tech journalist on the flight, a man she hadn't even noticed, had meticulously live-tweeted the entire saga. He had described a woman with pearls and prejudice in seat 2C with such damning accuracy that the internet's digital bloodhounds had identified her before the cancelled flight was even officially off the departures board. She arrived at her sprawling home in Greenwich, the manicured lawns and stately brick facade, suddenly feeling like a fortress under siege. She poured herself a brandy, her hand trembling, and tried to tell herself it would all blow over. It was a misunderstanding, a kerfuffle that the airline's PR department would handle. She was Brenda Harrington. Things blew over for people like her. The call came an hour later. It wasn't the airline. It was Robert Sterling, the CEO of her firm, Carlyle Consulting. "Brenda," he said, his voice devoid of its usual collegial warmth. It was flat cold and final. "Robert, thank God. You won't believe the day I've had. This is a complete media fabrication, a hit job. Is it a fabrication, Brenda, that you verbally harassed a minor on an airplane?" Robert asked the question, not an inquiry, but a sentencing. "Is it a fabrication that your actions directly led to the cancellation of a flight carrying a life-saving surgical team? I was concerned about security." The girl didn't look like she belonged. "She belonged there more than you, apparently." He snapped, his patience gone. "The client we were flying to London to sign the multi-$100 million deal with Omni Solutions. They just terminated the negotiations. Their CEO is on the board of the Global Health Initiative. He called me personally. He said, and I quote, 'We cannot be in business with a firm that employs morally bankrupt bullies.'" Brenda felt the blood drain from her face. "Robert, I have given 25 years to this firm, and you have undone 25 years of reputation building in 2 hours," he retorted. "The board convened an emergency session half an hour ago. Pursuant to the morals and ethics clause in your partnership agreement, your position is terminated effective immediately. Security is on its way to your home to collect your company property. Do not contact any of our clients. A press release announcing your departure is going out in 5 minutes. The line went dead. Brenda stared at the phone in her hand. She opened her web browser and saw the headline on the front page of a major news network consultant's racist tirade grounds critical medical flight. Beneath it was a professional headshot of her smiling, the string of pearls around her neck, looking less like a symbol of class and more like a leash yanking her down into the abyss she had dug all by herself. For Gregory Fields, the downfall was less public, but just as absolute. He was summoned not to his home, but to a windowless HR office at Aerovista's corporate headquarters. Across a cheap laminate table sat the VP of Human Resources and a grim-faced lawyer from the airline's legal department. They didn't offer him coffee. "Mr. Nahar," Fields, the HR executive, began, "we have concluded our investigation into the incident on flight AV710. Gregory, desperate, tried to launch his pre-planned defense. I was in an impossible situation. Mrs. Harrington is an elite status flyer. She was threatening my job. I was trying to de-escalate the conflict by providing the other passenger with an alternative." The lawyer cut him off, sliding a folder across the table. "You mean by punishing the victim? We have sworn statements from 12 separate passengers, Mr. Fields, all of them members of the surgical team, all of them medical professionals trained in objective observation. They state unequivocally that Ms. Zoe Washington was silent and calm until you and your colleague approached her. They state that the aggression came from one source, Mrs. Harrington. Yet you chose to remove the 16-year-old child. I had to make a choice. Gregory pleaded, his voice cracking. Yes, you did, the HR executive said coolly. And that choice has so far cost this company an estimated $8 million in direct losses and has created a public relations crisis that will cost tens of millions more to mitigate. You weren't de-escalating a conflict. You were validating prejudice because it was the path of least resistance. You are a liability, Mr. Fields. Your employment with Aerovista Premier is terminated for gross misconduct. Your union will not support you on this. We advise you find a new career path. He was escorted out like a criminal. His ID badge deactivated, his career in aviation incinerated. As he stood under the grey sky outside the building, the roar of a jet taking off from JFK sounded like a mocking laugh. While Gregory's fate was being sealed, Aerovista's executives were in full-blown panic. In the main boardroom, VP Michael Preston watched in horror as cable news channels ran the story on a loop. On another screen, the company's stock ticker was a waterfall of red. They're calling it flying while black on Aerovista. The head of PR said, her face pale. This is a brand killer. Preston slammed his hand on the table. Get Dr. Washington's people on the phone. I don't care what it costs. We don't negotiate. We capitulate. Offer her a private jet to London on us. Tell her we'll fund her entire GHI program for the next fiscal year. And draft the most self-flagellating public apology in the history of corporate America. We don't ask for forgiveness. We get on our knees and beg for it. Far above the chaos soaring through the stratosphere in the silent, opulent cabin of a Gulfstream G150, a different conversation was taking place. Zoe had been quiet for the first hour of the flight, watching the curve of the earth appear against the blackness of space. Are you okay? Isabel asked, gently, sitting across from her. Zoe finally turned from the window. I feel strange. I'm so angry at what that woman and that flight attendant did, but watching you, Mum, I've never seen anything like it. You didn't even raise your voice. Isabel reached across and took her daughter's hand. Rage is a tool, Zoe, but it's a blunt instrument. It's satisfying, but it rarely builds anything. What that woman wanted was to see you crumble. What that airline expected was for me to yell, to make a scene they could dismiss as a hysterical passenger. I chose not to give them what they wanted. She squeezed Zoe's hand. I needed them to understand this wasn't an emotional outburst. It was a professional, calculated response to a systemic failure. Sometimes when people try to put you in a small box, you can't just argue. You have to calmly and rationally demonstrate that you own the entire building the box is in. It wasn't about revenge, baby. It was about ensuring that the cost of their prejudice was so astronomically high, they would never ever risk making that same calculation again with someone else's child. Zoe looked at her mother, her brilliant, powerful, loving mother, and the last vestiges of humiliation from the day finally melted away, replaced by a profound and empowering clarity. They arrived in London with hours to spare. Dr. Washington and her team performed all 6 surgeries over the following days, their hands steady, their focus absolute. 6 young lives were saved. The mission was a success, made possible not in spite of the incident, but because of the unwavering strength it had revealed. The summer sun that filtered through the ancient leaded glass windows of Oxford's Bodleian Library was meant to be a source of inspiration for Zoe Washington. Here, surrounded by centuries of accumulated knowledge, She was supposed to be diving into the elegant complexities of string theory and the grand architecture of the cosmos. And she was, but her focus was constantly fractured by a new, unwanted reality. She had become a symbol. In the first few weeks of her program, the whispers followed her down the hallowed halls. She was the Aerovista girl. Her face, captured in a few grainy cell phone pictures from the terminal, was recognizable. Most of the reactions were positive, especially from other students of color, who would approach her with a quiet nod of solidarity. One afternoon, a postgraduate chemistry student from Nigeria stopped her by the river Cherwell. "What your mother did," he said, his voice thick with emotion. It gave courage to so many of us who have been told to just swallow it, to just move to the back of the plane, metaphorically. Thank you. Those moments were a balm, a confirmation that their stand had meant something beyond their own personal vindication. But there was another side to the notoriety. There were the stares that felt less like admiration and more like scrutiny. There were the overheard snippets of conversation from privileged students who saw the incident not as an issue of justice, but of inconvenience. One evening in the dining hall, she heard a boy with a signet ring and a plummy accent complaining to his friends. "The whole thing is a circus. My father's shares in that airline dropped 3 points, all because one girl couldn't handle being asked a simple question." The comment, so callous and dismissive, made Zoe's stomach clench. She wanted to stand up, to walk over and unleash the sharp, incisive arguments she honed on her debate team. She wanted to explain the systemic weight behind that simple question, the history of exclusion packed into Brenda Harrington's venomous sneer. But she didn't. She just picked at her food, the humiliation of that day replaying in her mind, a phantom limb of an injury that still ached. The incident had made her a public figure, but it had also stolen her anonymity, forcing her to carry the weight of a global conversation when all she wanted to do was solve physics problems. Her phone calls with her mother became her lifeline. Isabel back in New York, and managing the fallout was a steady, calming presence. "How are you holding up, Zed?" Isabel asked one evening, her voice clear over the thousands of miles. "I'm fine," Zoe lied, then immediately corrected herself. Honesty was the bedrock of their relationship. "No, I'm not. I feel like I'm living in someone else's story. I'm proud of what you did, Mum. I'm so proud it hurts. But I want to be known for my brain, not for being the girl who got kicked out of first class." "I know," baby Isabel said softly. "And you will be. This is just the echo. It's loud right now, but it will fade. What won't fade is the change we are forcing them to make. Remember that. We aren't just fighting for us. We are fighting for the next Zoe who steps onto a plane." The fight was no longer happening in an airport terminal. It had moved to the hushed, carpeted conference rooms of a high-powered law firm in Manhattan. Aerovista, desperate to avoid a public trial, had entered into settlement negotiations. But the Global Health Initiative, with Isabel setting the strategy, wasn't just after money. They were after systemic change, and to get it, their lawyers needed to establish an undeniable record of the malice and negligence that occurred. That process required depositions, and the first person on their list was Brenda Harrington. The conference room was a study in beige anonymity. A long, polished mahogany table reflected the grim faces of the two legal teams. On one side sat the lawyers for Aerovista, looking tense and beleaguered. On the other sat the lead counsel for the Global Health Initiative, a sharp, unflappable woman named Maria Chen, with Dr. Isabel Washington by her side. Isabel was not required to be there, but she insisted. She would bear witness. Then Brenda Harrington was shown in. The transformation was shocking. The imperious, perfectly coiffed woman from seat 2C was gone. In her place was a sallow, diminished figure. Her expensive suit hung on her slightly, and her hair, while still blonde, lacked its helmet-like structure. She looked older, tired and deeply afraid. The pearls were gone. She sat down opposite Isabel, refusing to make eye contact, staring instead at a spot on the table as if it held the secrets to her salvation. The deposition began. Maria Chen's voice was placid, her questions methodical, each one a carefully placed stone, building a path toward the truth. Mrs. Harrington, please state your name and former occupation for the record. Brenda Harrington, she mumbled. I was a senior partner at Carlyle Consulting. Was, Chen probed gently. I am no longer employed there. Brenda conceded, her voice barely a whisper. Chen moved on, establishing the facts of the day, leading Brenda through her arrival at the airport, her boarding of the flight. Then she came to the heart of the matter. Mrs. Harrington, you stated to the flight attendant, Mr. Gregory Fields, that you believed my client's daughter, a minor, was in the wrong seat. Is that correct? Yes. It was an unusual sight, Brenda said, her voice gaining a sliver of its old defensiveness. What was unusual about it? Well, she was very young. To be in international first class, there were other people in first class were there, not a man in a suit, a couple. Did you ask any of them for their credentials? No, but you singled out Zoe Washington, a 16-year-old girl who was sitting quietly reading a book. Why, Brenda hesitated. Her lawyer, a man with tired eyes, gave a slight shake of his head, a warning to be careful. I just had a feeling something was amiss. A feeling Chen repeated, letting the word hang in the air. Let's talk about that feeling. Did it have anything to do with the fact that Zoe Washington was the only black person in the first-class cabin? No, absolutely not, Brenda said too quickly. I don't have a racist bone in my body. My company did a great deal of charity work in underprivileged communities. Isabel listened, her expression unreadable. She wasn't watching an evil monster. She was watching a pathetic, self-deluding woman whose entire sense of identity was built on a fragile foundation of privilege. Chen produced a transcript from the airline's internal report, which included witness statements. Mrs. Harrington, a passenger in seat 3A. Mr. David Chen, no relation, stated that he heard you say, and I quote, I'm sure the coach cabin is perfectly lovely for people like you. Do you recall saying that to Zoe Washington? Brenda's face, already pale, became ashen. I might have said something to that effect. I was just making an observation about the different service levels. An observation. Chen's voice was now edged with steel. Or an insinuation. What kind of people were you referring to? Mrs. Harrington, Brenda looked desperately at her lawyer, who could offer no help. She was cornered by her own words. I don't recall my exact intention. Let me suggest an intention, Chen pressed on. Is it not true that you saw a young black woman in a space you felt belonged to you, and you decided she didn't belong? That your feeling was not based on any action she took, but entirely on who she was? On her age and on the color of her skin, Brenda stared at the table, her composure finally cracking. A single tear rolled down her cheek and splashed onto the polished mahogany. She didn't answer. She couldn't. Any answer she gave would either be an admission of bigotry or a bald-faced lie that would be shredded under further questioning. Her silence was the loudest confession in the room. Isabel watched her, and for the first time she felt a flicker of something close to pity. Not for the loss of Brenda's job or status, but for the sheer emptiness of a soul so poisoned by prejudice that it had to tear down a child to feel important. The damage Brenda had inflicted was immense, but the source of it was a profound and pathetic weakness. The deposition continued for another hour, but it was over. The record was clear, irrefutable. When they left the conference room, the Aerovista lawyers looked like men who knew they were about to sign a surrender. The settlement, when it came, was historic. Aerovista agreed to every one of Isabel's demands. The monetary compensation to the Global Health Initiative was substantial enough to fund their next 3 medical missions. But the real victory lay in the other terms. Aerovista was forced to establish the Zoe Washington Future Leaders Grant, a multi-million-dollar perpetual scholarship fund for young women and students of color pursuing degrees in STEM fields. Zoe's name, which she once feared would only be associated with a travel incident, would now be a beacon of opportunity. Furthermore, the airline had to contract a diversity, equity, and inclusion firm, one chosen by Isabel, to completely redesign and implement their customer service training from the executive level down to the newest gate agent. The Washington Protocol, as it became known internally, was a new set of strict zero-tolerance policies for handling passenger-on-passenger harassment with a clear mandate to protect the victimized, not placate the aggressor. Months later, Zoe stood on a small stage at the Cooper Union in New York for the official launch of the grant. She had flown home from Oxford for the event. The room was filled with journalists, academics, GHI board members, and the first group of bright, hopeful scholarship recipients. Zoe, in a simple, elegant dress, clutched her notes. Her voice trembled as she began to speak. "My name is Zoe Washington. A few months ago, a woman told me I didn't belong in a certain seat on an airplane. She was wrong about the seat, but she was right in one way. My true place isn't just in seat 2B on a flight. My place is here, and my place is in a physics lab. And your place," she said, looking directly at the young students in the front row, "is wherever your mind and your hard work can take you. This grant isn't about a bad day I had. It's about ensuring that you have thousands of good days where the only thing that limits you is the scope of your own dreams." When she finished, the room erupted in applause. Isabel stood in the back, her eyes shining with tears of pride. This was the legacy. Not the anger, not the humiliation, but this tangible, positive, world-altering change. The next day they flew back to London together so Zoe could finish her term. They flew a different airline. As they settled into their seats in first class, a flight attendant came by. He was a kind-faced man who smiled warmly at Zoe. "Can I get you anything before we take off a glass of orange juice?" "A warm towel," he asked. "Orange juice would be lovely, thank you," Zoe said, smiling back. It was a simple, normal exchange, an act of mundane courtesy. But for Zoe and Isabel, it felt like a quiet victory. The sky outside the window was a brilliant, endless blue. The plane took off, climbing smoothly into the upper atmosphere, leaving the noise and the anger far below. They were just 2 passengers, a mother and a daughter, heading towards their future. And the world, in one small but meaningful way, had been rebalanced. The story of Zoe and Dr. Isabel Washington serves as a powerful, real-world reminder that one person's voice, wielded with conviction, can indeed change the world, or at least the flight path of a major airline. It's a testament to the fact that true power isn't about shouting the loudest, but about knowing your value and refusing to let anyone diminish it. This incident wasn't just about a cancelled flight. It was about a cancelled culture of intolerance. The consequences that befell the instigators weren't cosmic justice. They were the direct, earthly result of their own terrible choices coming home to roost. If this story resonated with you, and if you believe in the power of standing up against injustice, please give this video a like and share it with your friends. Your engagement helps these important stories reach a wider audience. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you won't miss our next story of everyday people achieving extraordinary justice. Thank you for watching.